It's just one more way of reducing your liberty and reminding you that they can fuck with you anytime they want, as long as you put up with it. As long as you put up with it. Which means, of course, anytime they want. Because that's what Americans do now. They're always willing to trade away a little of their freedom in exchange for the feeling, the illusion of security. What we have now is a completely neurotic population obsessed with security and safety and crime and drugs and cleanliness and hygiene and germs. There's another thing. Germs. Where did this sudden fear of germs come from in this country? Have you noticed this? The media constantly running stories about all the latest infections, salmonella, E. coli, hantavirus, bird flu, and Americans they panic easily, so now everybody's running around scrubbing this and spraying that and overcooking their food and repeatedly washing their hands, trying to avoid all contact with germs. It's ridiculous, and it goes to ridiculous lengths. In prisons, before they give you a lethal injection, they swab your arm with alcohol.
That I welcome this kind of examination.
We tortured some folks. The CIA is fundamental to America's national security.
There is a war going on. The battlefield's in the mind, and the prize is the soul.
I don't believe anything the government tells me.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never.
Hi, I am Irv Kopi, host of Movie Theater. Joe Brand and I agree.
Wait a minute, I want a woman.
All right, Cincinnati, it is time for this town to get down.
This is the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hi, this is John Lear. You're listening to the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm S.T. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing and traversing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, the court historians, and those textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we have episode 162, The Ochelli Effect, and our guest tonight is talk show host extraordinaire, Chuck Ochelli. First, however, let us clean this castle for the first time in 2022. Welcome to the new year, and as we do every year, we're going to go into this year with a bit of optimism, despite it already having been a challenging first few weeks in the world. But that said, thanks for being here, thanks for being with us, and hey, since it's the first episode of the year, let's actually go over some of the contact info. I know some podcast services out there you may be listening to, they only allow for 100 or so episodes to be archived, so I should remind everyone that you can listen to all of the episodes of the show from 001 to this one, 162, at midnightridernews.com. And once again, that is writer as in someone who writes with the pen, WRITER, midnightridernews.com. If you'd like to contact us, you can also do so at midnightridernews@gmail.com. Now, if you'd like more information on Garrison, the Journal of History and Deep Politics, it will be in the show notes, and it's also at the website. We'll be right back with Chuck Ochelli.
This is Jim Hogan, author of the three-part series on Jonestown, which can be read at jimhogan.com. For more on the 913 suspicious deaths at Jonestown, as well as the real history of Jim Jones, listen to episode 57 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
Tonight we're going to talk about some of the forefathers of alternative radio, what we do here. But if we consider the important voices doing it today via this medium podcasting, we can certainly mention guys like, for example, Dave Emery or Ed Opperman or our friend J.G. Michael. But any list that we could make would be incomplete without mentioning our guest tonight. Now, he's one of the premier voices of alternative radio, and we're going to find out just how he found himself in the earbuds and car speakers around the world. And he was kind enough to have me on his show last week, and it was a great conversation, so I'm happy to have him here tonight. Chuck Ochelli, how are you?
I'm okay middle of the afternoon, so I haven't quite hit my full stride as we record, but how you doing?
Okay, so first I'd like to remind everyone that I am on the town square in my little quaint Indiana hamlet. So you may hear the hustle and bustle of the town in the background. After all, I was born in a small town and I live in a small town. So Chuck, when I first dabbed my toe into alternative radio, really sort of planning what would end up being the show, you were the first voice that I heard, and you were the host recommended to me most. And I've told you the story before, but I was at my first JFK conference in Dallas in November of 2016, and a few of us had to hurry up to John Barber's room because he had to make an appearance that evening on the Ochelli Effect. And I thought it went very well, actually. I remember John being especially fired up. There was a lot going on in the fall of 2016, of course. But I was always in love with this idea of radio, and I was one of those kids who had the transistor radio hidden under my pillow, and I would spend hours just scrolling through the AM dial, really just taking in the world and trying to find the station furthest away. And as a native Illinoisan, the furthest I think it ever got for me were those late nights when I can pick up an AM station out of San Antonio. But what first really sparked your interest in radio?
It's funny, about the same way, because I couldn't sleep at night as a kid. And I didn't have a lot of friends. I kind of had a little bit of a rough childhood. So honestly, the radio was like my friend. And I would do the same thing as you, except I might be getting some, if the weather was just right on the AM, I might catch some stuff from Chicago sitting in New Jersey. So I had New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, which was part of my normal, listening band, so to speak. But sometimes you tune around with that AM dial and all of a sudden you would hear, things from the western part of Pennsylvania, which you're not supposed to get, or stuff from Virginia even, and Boston, and every once in a while out in Ohio and even into Illinois. Hear weird things like farm reports, I know Jersey's the garden state, but I assure you, not much garden where I grew up. So farm reports were not normal. Things like that. But I loved the talk shows. Even though I became a musician, and you would think, oh, he probably was listening to music radio. I was, but that was during the day. At night, it was the best because they turned it over to a variety of different regional and local talk radio people, when a lot of those programs weren't widely syndicated. And you got some trashy stuff and weird things, odd discussions about local events that made almost no sense, to a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, but starts to educate you a little bit. And some people where I grew up, some of the stuff they did was very odd at night. You got stuff from Long Island that was unusual. I remember catching shows about the supernatural, and no, I don't think initially it was anybody whose name you'd even know. Just like people would be like, "Have you ever been haunted? Call us up if you've seen a ghost." And then people at 2:00 in the morning would be calling up. Some of them drunk, some of them, telling these really deep, weird stories. Other people prank calling the station. And I don't know. I just enjoyed it. And talk radio evolved in the New York area, especially. In the early 80s, we started to see stuff like, in the 70s, we saw like Imus and things like that, where Imus was okay. But honestly, I was a Howard Stern listener as a kid for a while. But he was on the afternoon, on NBC radio. And but I listened to the conservative guys and the religious guys, and I didn't care if they were telling a story or if they were having a conversation. I could engage in that and participate in theater of the mind, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. And even with religious radio, you were by default learning how to do the medium. And I did the same thing. I still do. But when I was in college, my my sleeping patterns were forever altered by the discovery of Art Bell. Now, Art didn't really expand until Larry King retired, and many out there may not know this, but before he was known for his CNN television show, Larry King was I'll say it, the king of late night radio talk. And you can just imagine what he was like on the radio with that voice. Los Angeles, hello. But when King left to focus on television, this guy out of the small desert town of Pahrump, Nevada came on, and that was Art Bell. And as we know, 500 stations later, it was one of the biggest radio shows in the world. And I was enthralled, not only by Art Bell, the personality, and by the way, I think Art Bell was really good at doing radio. But by hearing about the JFK assassination for the first time, and by actually hearing Jim Mars for the first time, and by listening to John Lear tell the Bob Lazar story for the first time, and by my mind really just being open to infinite things that I'd never really thought about before on a nightly basis, a nightly 5-hour basis. And what I borrowed from Art, though, as a host, is that I will let people talk, and I try not to interrupt, and I try to take everyone seriously, even and especially if I do have some doubts about their story. And there have been some people on this show, and I have doubts about their story, but I always think that they deserve that respect, and I know that Art did too. And Art Bell was so good at doing that, but the thing that I loved most about Art and about Coast to Coast to Him, and I want to point out that I think you do this very well, is that there was an environment created around the show. It had a familiarity for listeners. It was a community of listeners and guests, and you want that. You want people to feel like they're coming home when they listen to you, like it's a familiar place to be for them, that it's a comfortable place to be them. And again, you do this very well, but was there anyone for you that you borrowed from?
A whole lot of people, in all honesty, because see, my evolution came a little differently. I got into Art Bell like you did too for a little bit, but honestly, Art Bell was very tame to me by that time because I got a shortwave radio.
Ah, okay.
And so I was listening to Bill Cooper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shortwave radio. And I was listening to guys in their basement in Alabama talking about the messages of the scripture and the end of the world. And stuff like that. Plus, BBC around the world and stuff like that in the 80s. But really, you know what? I got to tell you, I got to go back to when I was, again, my third grade year in school was very interesting. It's when I got introduced to the JFK assassination and posed my first uncomfortable question in public when I was being told the story by my third grade teacher, who was showing us some pictures and things. And my whole thing started with, wait a minute. This guy was in police custody, got killed, and the cops didn't kill him. Something wrong there. And I was 9, right? So same year, though, about a month before that, because my third grade teacher did this around the anniversary of the assassination. My third grade teacher pulled out a record of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds and played that for the class, and we sat and listened to it. Most of the kids were bored to death, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So I appreciated the genre right away from that, but continued to listen to my own AM stuff and kept looking for my own War of the Worlds, so to speak. And the Kennedy assassination thing, I had questions about it and this and that, and it took me some years, all the way up to the 25th anniversary, before I started to get involved. But, and that, frankly, was right around the same time that Bill Cooper got really active, and, I got one of those videotapes in the mail and all that kind of stuff when he put out, the limo driver shot him and. But look, it's 1988. What do you want me to do?
You know what, though? I still, and it's always an older gentleman, Chuck, but I still have older gentlemen coming up to me, and for some reason they always want to whisper it to me almost, and they'll say, "Hey, you know who really killed Kennedy? It was the driver. You need to look into it." And I guess there was a point in the 1980s when it was in vogue to think that Bill Greer was the killer. And yes, by in vogue, I mean there was a sort of subsection of alternative researchers. That doesn't mean it was popular with researchers like Vince Salandri and Mark Lane, but it still today has a bit of an audience, that theory. And I'm not sure who Bill Cooper got that from specifically, but it's interesting to me that you were listening to Cooper live and in real time, not with the hindsight of knowing what was going to happen or what happened to him. But I've really only heard the audio. I think the show was called The Hour of Time. I've only heard the audio of the show years after. But listening to Bill Cooper live, did you find that exciting? Did you find that bizarre? Were you fascinated by it, or what?
Oh, I thought it was great. I thought I was listening to something that that everybody in the world wanted to suppress. I've always been very interested in those kind of things. Tell you why. A couple of adults earlier, a little bit after my 9-year-old time there with War of the Worlds, and hey, the cops didn't kill Lee Harvey Oswald. A couple of years after that, and I mean maybe not even a couple, maybe only a year after that, some adults in my life had these cassette tapes from Mae Brussell.
I love Mae Brussell.
So I was listening to Mae Brussell and stuff like, see, like I said, by the time I got to Art Bell, it was like, well, good. I'm glad that's on regular radio.
Oh yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that.
It's too funny to me now, but Cooper is the progenitor for that. In as much as he's the one who definitely got out the word. Now, there was a guy, and at the time I was listening to him on shortwave, there was a controversy between him and a guy, and I think it was Sweden, or here's the thing. As a kid, I might have mixed up Sweden and Switzerland. I'm not sure. But there was an argument between them two as to who actually discovered this. One of them had like a black and white version of the film. The other one had a color version of the film. Look, his show wasn't all about that, though. He was talking about the stuff that you did end up hearing about on Art Bell, underground bases. And, is there a base on the moon? Stuff like this. And I'm in my teenage years, just getting my teeth wet as a local musician. But not really traveling to some of the places he was talking about. And he was coming out of Arizona, I think, Cooper at the time. And it was like as if I was listening to an unauthorized broadcast that, the government wants suppressed, and that not only the government, but everybody wants it suppressed, because I'm going to tell you the truth. And it's so funny to me now, the people that are like, oh, I've been into this whole thing since, 2010. And I'm like, yeah, there was a long history here of people doing this before there was an internet, basically a podcast, And
no, and I think that's okay, because everybody has an entry point, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I remember reading Behold a Pale Horse for the first time and having the same feeling that you had listening to Bill Cooper. It was like you were reading something that they didn't want you to read, and it was an amazing feeling. And I'm really surprised at this world of conspiracy, and I don't love the word conspiracy, but we'll use it here because it's easy. I'm surprised it's gotten so partisan, because the world of conspiracy used to have its own theories on the right and the left, and you didn't really have to be from either side to believe that Oswald didn't act alone. You had theories and theorists across the spectrum. I definitely wouldn't say that Mae Brussell was on the right at all.
No, clearly a leftist type.
But then Bill Cooper now gets pigeonholed as being on the right.
See, now here's the strange thing, right? Because this stuff again existed in. Everybody says, oh, it was bipartisan, but it wasn't. There were clearly two different paths here. One of them was very much left-wing, and the other one was very much right-wing. The right-wing stuff, if you go back to a lot of the, now people can get them, but a lot of the speeches of, because I used to collect audio tapes and trade audio tapes with people around the country. And every now and then I'd get a hold of stuff where it was like, a speech from the 60s, from somebody from the John Birch Society, And people like this very much on the right wing side, like I had heard Walker's speech in the 80s, before anybody had a hold of that stuff over in the East Coast, because I was tape trading. And things like this. I mean, and when I say Walker's speech, I mean speeches, and I don't mean that he made just one type. But you could hear and by the way, you could also get recordings of stuff that the Klan had to say at some of their meetings and stuff like that, depending. And you heard a lot of the stuff that you hear today in what I'll describe as conspiracy culture, but less intermingled with anything other than a given agenda, which, if the Klan was talking about the international banking cabal, it's because they were angry with Jews. And that's what it was about. It was about the Jews and the Jews trying to run the world, and Hitler was right. And, and sadly that has resurrected itself, in the internet age, repeatedly. And probably was there at the at the initial public opening of the internet, really, but sadly it's gained traction because of the internet and things like that. And at the same time, there was more of a left-wing element, and frankly, most of the people that, if you look back at the people who were able to get attention for stuff like the JFK assassination, the RFK assassination, the King assassination, if you take a look back at them, they were very left-wing oriented. I mean, you don't get much more left-wing than Mark Lane. I know he's a controversial figure, but I mean, you don't get much more left-wing and yet establishment than Mark Lane. And a lot of these guys were, intellectuals, but definitely, lefties. That really did the work early on. And that stuff got adapted into and adopted into right-wing conspiracies. But then again, there is what I would call patriot mythology as well, where Cooper brings all of this stuff together. And that's the thing. Like, Mae Brussel was clearly a lefty. And clearly cared about human rights and things like this. I mean, she did a lot of shows, not just on JFK, but also on, Manson maybe not being guilty of all the things that he was supposed to have been, the abuses of prisoners in various facilities, and things like that. And I'm not saying Mae Brussel got everything right, but you could see where her heart was. And you could see that she did a lot of work with what was openly available, and interacted with a lot of people that were key figures one way or another in getting the message out about the various misdeeds of the U.S. government and cover-ups and things like this. But she was clearly on the left-wing side. Now, when you look at Cooper, it's a different story, because he brings together some of that, honestly, some of the underbelly of the right-wing hate mill. Some of their conspiracy theory stuff. He brings that together with what I'll consider patriot mythology. A big, for instance, is JFK was printing silver certificates, and therefore the international bankers had him killed. This is wholly ridiculous. But anyway, it's only because you have to look at the executive order they point to, and it doesn't actually say what they say it does. And also, the monetary instrument that they describe as being subversive to the Federal Reserve is not. And JFK's act literally turned it over to C. Douglas Dillon, who was his Treasury Secretary at the time, control of the printing of that anyway. I urge you to see a presentation from a guy named James Corbett about that. He does it rather concisely. But anyway, I've done it too, and I've also had G. Edward Griffin on to discuss it because, there's a guy, Creature from Jekyll Island and stuff like that. If you don't know who that is, by all means, look into it. I'm not saying you. I'm thinking of the listener who might say, who the hell's that? Just in case. But that stuff came from what I would call patriot mythology, where there's, certain ideas that are out there that are repeated no matter what the evidence is, because they further a particular agenda, which is about the grievances of individuals that feel as though they lost their country. And I sympathize with that. And so did Bill. But Bill also was somebody who was not a racist, was not, at least not publicly, clearly had, his heart with a lot of people that were oppressed and abused. And it wasn't just about, the plight of the white man with Bill Cooper. As a matter of fact, he got pretty angry at some people in his universe there that, went in that direction. And he's a nuanced story, and I'm not trying to defend Bill Cooper either, because again, the progenitor of one of the worst myths in JFK conspiracy culture. He's a guy who pushed it, and he also did some other weird things. If you ever take a look at his public presentations, for one of which I was present for, but I actually went my first ever trip to Georgia before I decided to live here. When I was still living in Jersey, I came down here to see Bill do a live thing. And it was kind of a mess and interesting. And of course he played the Zapruder film, the alleged driver shot him and all that. I think that was maybe in 91, 92. I can't remember which. I know basically because I had graduated high school by then. So I know it was after June of 91 when I did graduate. So, but, anyways, there's an interesting history again that has come together. And then once we got the internet, well, we got message boards and things like that. And many of us who couldn't communicate with each other before, unless we were going through the veins of somebody like Vince Salandria, who, I don't know if anybody's ever archived all of the chain letters and things that were out there, but there used to be like, here, we're going to send you a letter. Now staple something else to it and send it along. And you will find a very young me mixed in Vince Salandria's chain letters if somebody ever archives it all. But anyway, and I didn't know anything back then, by the way. So I had nothing interesting. You will find nothing interesting from me in there. But you may find me commenting on things that Salandria was discovering, or a whole lot of other people who wound up doing some interesting work on the case later. Anyways, but all I'm saying is that there's an interesting evolution. And back to the thing with Art Bell, though, once you get into the 90s, now you have, a greater interest in some of this stuff, which is now a little more accessible through mainstream media, and obviously Oliver Stone. And what he did, lit a fire under a lot of people. So, there's a lot to be said there. So, yeah, but continue on, because we've only gotten into the 90s for your appreciation of this media form.
Oh, no. Well, the 90s were such a fascinating period for conspiracy, because when you have the onset of the internet as well, but I had Ralph Epperson on to talk about just how hard that research was to do. And, Ralph's an interesting guy, and
Ralph is a little cranky, though. Ralph is a little cranky nowadays.
Well, yeah, no, he's a little older now, and he is a little crankier, but he's a nice guy. He's a really Ralph is a really nice person.
Absolutely,
and he was good to us.
You
and
not know it, but he's been on my show a couple times.
Yeah, but yeah, he's gotten a little crankier as he's gotten older.
But see, and there you go. There's an example of a guy who was in Cooper's universe, who absolutely needed to be. And again, there's a blending of some very solid, good questions from Epperson, some very intense opposition to the direction of the country, what's gone on with America, people that appreciate patriot mythology, certainly enjoyed the work of Ralph Epperson, whether they knew it or not. The Hidden Hand is the one I always point to, but Epperson's written a few books on this, and I think still has some unpublished. Last I checked with him, I haven't had him on for a couple of years, but very interesting guy. But a little cranky. He's gotten older. I'm shocked he's still with us.
He is. And I haven't had him on the show in a few years either. I probably should see what he's doing and see what he's up to. But I felt like when I did have him on, he gave us quite a long time, and I was able to ask him everything I wanted to ask him. And I suggest that everyone go back and find that episode with Ralph Epperson, because he does talk extensively about meeting Bill Cooper in that episode. And Ralph is also from Arizona, so he and Cooper did a few shows together, and it's a pretty good story. And I asked both Ralph and then John Lear about doing conspiracy pre-internet, and gosh, Chuck, I can't even imagine the money that they spent on Xerox copies and long distance phone bills, and the amount of gas that was used hauling a tape recorder and blank cassette tapes hundreds of miles to record an interview with someone who may or may not even show up, or who may not have what they promised. And they both had fun reminiscences about those times, so I would definitely go back and listen to those as well. But I was about to say, it's because of that. It's because that it was so much harder that I can excuse them if they did some things wrong, and if they maybe had some ideas that were off base. Doing conspiracy was so much harder back then, when you didn't have the research tools the internet provides, and when feedback could take weeks or months rather than moments, as it does right now. And I think people are fallible, especially when they're going through a research process. And I was not going to bring up cancel culture today, but I will say this. I think we're too quick to write someone off. And I've always wondered if we make a mistake by judging a researcher's motivations too much. And by too much, I mean that if, for example, if there's an African-American researcher who openly hates white people and pushes an FBI killed Malcolm X theory, I don't think we can write him off just because he's anti-white. I don't think we can write off the FBI killed Malcolm X theory because of the researcher's motivations. And I think we still need to look into the facts of what he's trying to present. Just as I don't think that we can write off the Gary Allen books and the John Birch Society work on the Rothschilds just because they're far right. I don't think we can do that. Some of that information is valuable. But in this ultra-touchy society in which we now live, it becomes even more difficult to parse those kinds of things. So I think we just have to be careful when we paint with that wide brush. And I honestly think that Bill Cooper gets a bad rap in some ways.
Yeah, but see, here we go. We got to go with nuance. Like I said, there is some awful stuff Bill did. I grant you. But there's also some very interesting work that he was doing, given what he had to work with. He tried building like an intelligence network of just informants, people that were doing their separate work, trying to bring people together. Previous to the internet being accessible. He would send out packets, and you could send him intelligence information. He had I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was like Citizens Intelligence Group or something, which, it was about, send us your leads, send us the documents, we'll go through them. I mean, it was an interesting way of trying to create our own clearinghouses, which we didn't have. We had no way, there wasn't organizations you could join. In the early 90s, you had a couple of conferences in Dallas, but there wasn't the two competing JFK conferences there yet. They were called ESC conferences, I think, and I can't even remember what the acronym stood for. And they were interesting, but there was a lot going on. A lot of things, needed to be organized, and people organized them as they went along. And even people like Art Bell, which people will also, pan nowadays. Extremely fascinating radio, no matter what you think of it. The saga of John Teeter or Tider or whatever. The guy who claimed to have been a time traveler in a truck, right?
Right. And the thing that I love about Art is if it didn't matter if it was John Teeter or if it was Mel's Hole or if it was what ended up being Heaven's Gate and the Hale-Bopp Comet, or if it was Jim Mars talking about JFK, or Bob Lazar talking about Area 51, or the Area 51 caller night. These are all famous moments from the show, but the one thing I loved about Art Bell is that he let everyone talk. He gave them the respect. He treated them very seriously. He didn't make fun of them. He didn't ask gotcha questions. He just absolutely treated them with respect.
Right.
And I like that.
Right. And the thing is, there's room for all of this. Bill was advocating for certain things. And again, under the Patriot banner, so to speak, although I don't think people would call him that now, that there was a short-lived time, and I think it still does kind of exist, this sort of Patriot media, where it's like, we're going to take back, the legitimacy, which I find to be laughable at this point in time, but at the same time sympathize with. I'm certainly a blended individual. If you want to put me on the left or the right, then I'll tell you that means you probably stand on the opposite side of where it is you want to place me.
Man, I feel that.
That's usually what goes on with.
Right. I don't know what there is now, but I do remember there were two networks specifically that were sort of Patriot radio. And one was GCN, which first had the Alex Jones Show. And then the other one was RBN, which I believe still exists, Republic Broadcasting Network. I think it is still around, I believe.
RBN still exists, and in fact, the founder just died like weeks ago.
Oh, John Statmiller. I did not know that.
Statmeyer over there, however you say his name, John. He passed away. But it's still going, RBN. And yeah, that stuff existed and still does. And there's little pockets of it all over the country, believe it or not, still on terrestrial radio. Okay. There is so much available, and I don't throw it all out. The only stuff I throw out is, clearly fictitious things, really. And there's been a lot of that too, where there's been plenty of made up stories. There's been plenty of fabrications which have a foundational piece, some small piece of evidence. I'll give you a good example. The whole the mob killed JFK thing, because usually they have some sort of foundational piece of evidence that makes sense. But after that, it gets lost. And that was a popular theme for a while. The mob did it. And we got that, thank you, G. Robert Blakey, for making sure to give legitimacy to that. But either way, they'll start with, Marcello confessed in prison to having, been the planner of the assassination. Okay, so on one level, that's kind of true. But on the other hand, the guy was beginning to suffer from dementia, if you take a look at when he died and what he was actually suffering from. So who knows what he was spouting? And if you take a listen to some of those tapes, which I have, guess what? He's spouting all kinds of weird things.
Right, or he could just be telling a story. He could just be lying. I mean, I think the possibilities are endless.
And that's the other thing. Like, with the whole, E. Howard Hunt confessed. All right. But all right, I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to disparage anybody. But the fact is that E. Howard Hunt, if you just objectively understand the guy purposely was engaged in disinformation stuff, and there might have been multiple motivations for doing what he did on that tape. I'm just saying, consider these things. And people will take and run with certain things.
Chuck, the JFK research community. I want to ask you about said community because you've produced a lot of content within and for that community. Yeah. And I know that our friends John Barber and our other mutual friend Walt Brown, they both dislike even calling it a community because they will tell you openly that it is not. But compared to other historical pockets you've been involved with, what are your thoughts? Because to me, it's very fractious.
Well, yeah.
And it's becoming older, and it's becoming more based around its own hierarchy. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. And sadly, this has happened a couple of times. And then something must come along in order to engage the youngsters, so to speak. It just has to happen. And sadly... Oh man, this is rough because I got to tell you, and I've tried to say this to people who are very, very concerned with truth regarding the 9/11 events, and things like this. I'm like, look, take a look at what goes on with the JFK community and learn not to do this, because the infighting, the competition, the sort of staking out your particular area, and all of this kind of stuff is helpful to no one. And that's the weird thing too, is because when I was doing a lot of on the ground research, which I haven't done much of in the past few years, I admit, but when I was doing a lot of it and doing favors for people, I handed people things. I gave away interviews, tapes, material. Okay. I don't even want to get into all of it because generally speaking, it was like an agreement that I wouldn't reveal that I gave things to people. People publish stuff in their books that I know where it came from. Me. People put things in documentaries where they, claim they have a source. And yeah, they got a second source, but the reason why they know about it is me. A bunch of things because I wanted to see the truth furthered and I didn't care about credit and things like that. Years ago, long before I started doing a radio show or wrote a single word, I've written one book review, in 30 years. Okay. I've written one, comment on Amazon for a book in 30 years. I've read hundreds. I've known a lot of these authors. I don't like to participate in the media circus usually. Didn't even go to conferences, very much at all. And things like that. I mean, even when I was asked to participate, I'm only participated in 2 technically. It's a very weird, difficult thing to go through, and things change as time goes along. These different alliances take place. It's like a 30-year series of Survivor, with the JFK community, and they shoot themselves in the foot all the time by doing this. There are people that could logically help one another. There are people that could further the actual unearthing of the truth. If they would just cooperate with a guy like Malcolm Blunt, who is freely open to working with almost anybody, talking to anybody, help you out with anything. And yet there are people that feel as though they kind of like, can't approach him or won't go near him. And the guy's been working on stuff very quietly. See, Malcolm Blunt's a name that doesn't come up too often, right? There are other authors that are so married to their theory and their books. I always call it the ugly woman syndrome. That, once something comes along to disprove it, they have this hard time admitting that, yeah, last night I was drunk and did not realize who I was going to wake up next to. And this is what they do. And I don't mean to just make this sound like men, but again, it's mostly men in the research community, outside of, a couple of, strong authors, Lisa Pease and, Joan Mellon and a few other exceptions. I mean, obviously Deborah Conway's participated in the research community quite a bit, but what I'm saying is there are mostly men who are very territorial. There are a lot of them that are well-educated, who, quite frankly, look down on some of their peers who are not as well-educated, and stuff like this. A lot of these guys are what? Professors, teachers, lawyers. Some of them are doctors, and there is a caste system. There is a hierarchy there. I have no problems talking to some of these guys who are doctor this and doctor that. And believe me, I can hold those conversations. I know I sound sort of like an idiot and I'm speaking on a street level.
Jeez, no.
But believe me, you put me in a room with these guys, they turn around and go, how come that guy who looks kind of like, I don't know, depending on when you see me, maybe looks like a biker or something. Why is he in the room having this very deep conversation? Whoops, wait a minute. He actually knows some of this stuff. It's like, well, how did you know about that? I was researching that document. It's like, yeah, so was I, because it's accessible. I've read it too. I know how to read the documents as well. Yes, I have done the comparison between this and this and this. Whose work did you read? I did my own. They're stunned at this kind of thing.
It's just gotten so much worse over the years, too. And it usually goes something like this. So a researcher will either do a book or a blog or an essay. There are multiple JFK sites out there. And they'll tell you that there are very credible people doing very valuable work on this topic. And hey, surprise, the valuable work being done by the credible researchers just so happens to be the work and the researchers that agree with them. And then they'll say, or they'll use the word discredited to describe researchers who don't agree with them. And they haven't really been discredited. All that usually means is that those who do agree with them have decided that this other researcher is wrong. I mean, it's all so tedious. And my best advice to anyone, though, is just read all perspectives. And if researcher A says that researcher B has been discredited, be more skeptical of researcher A than B. I mean, read it all, think about it, take notes, and then come up with your own conclusions. Be your own thought leader, because some of the people in these communities are not people you want to follow in line or in life.
That's the weird thing about me, though. I don't have a book to defend, and I have never put out, this is my theory. Now, I have bashed a couple of people. This is true. But it's because I take a look at their work, and it is not just flawed, but fatally flawed for one reason or another. This time of day, sorry if you're hearing cars go by. I'm on a busy road. Anyways, and look, I'm going to dispense with probably something that you're not going to want to spend a lot of time on, who some of your friends might be a little upset at me for saying this, and please bear with me, Mr. Patrick.
Oh, you're all good. You're all good.
Judith Barry Baker, who I have attacked several times, not because I think she's even a bad person or anything else like that, but because she's made various claims that are provably easily false. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that because she disagrees with my theory. I say that because I seriously looked into many different things that have been put out by this woman over the years, and I don't understand. So there is somebody, you said, there are some people who say, don't read this person. Look, I'll tell you, go read it. But pick a page, you can destroy it because it's built on a lot of bad information. And some of it's not about, well, you disagree because you don't know, you weren't there with Oswald. Forget any of that. I'm telling you that there's certain parts of reality in her presentation that are just not possible. You can't be in segregated parts of the South and be the only two white people present and not be noticed in certain areas, first of all. Second of all, describing things like dyslexia in a certain way are inaccurate. Okay? Just flatly inaccurate. Then you go to things like, what are we doing about, the description of, dealing with biological materials that she gives. And you go to somebody who does that work. Strange, odd, sad fact. You know who is an interesting person in that field who's written textbooks on things that should easily be able to unpack any of the descriptions Judy gives about her cancer work? Is a guy named Ernst Titovitz, who happened to have been a friend of Oswald's in Russia, right? Or, excuse me, let me be accurate. In Belarus, pronounce it as you like. Who's written textbooks on this kind of stuff, who was going to university and, yes, did want to speak English, and that's how he made friends with Oswald while over there, but also, just like everybody else, even though he doesn't admit it, I'm sure was approached by the KGB to keep an eye on him. Okay. Thing is, though, you talk to this guy, and he'll honestly say, I don't get it. I don't even want to talk about this because this is ludicrous what she describes. He does the kind of work that she says she did. Okay, and is capable of a great deal more. You can take a look. I mean, his textbooks are in Russian, so get a translation. But honestly, this is a guy who writes textbooks on this stuff. Okay, and look, and don't believe me. take it, break it apart yourself.
It is shocking to me that out of everything that people could ask me about the JFK assassination, I get asked about Judith Vary Baker the most. Yeah. And I mean, it's probably not even close. I get asked about her. And I always say that the part of the story I buy the most is Ed Haslam's work. I like the work that Haslam did originally.
I like Haslam's work. No. I liked Haslam's work too.
Right.
And added her into it, you see.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about Dr. Mary's Monkey, I think the original version that Haslam did and most of the updated version, I really like what he does. And that's the story that I believe.
Yes.
But even on that, I'm in the minority, and I understand that. And but I'll say this too. I do always say as well, even if you believe her story 100%, if she's right and everyone else is wrong, if you believe it 100%, I'm still not sure how important that is in the grand scheme of things.
Well, but that's the thing. Which story have you heard? Because it's evolved also.
Well, right.
And let's go back to Haslam, though. I want to point out something that even very recently, some of what Ed Haslam posited has been verified. Some, not the stuff involving her, don't get me wrong. When he's talking about Ochsner in his book, and I do mean, what was it, Mary Ferry and the Monkey Virus. Okay, when he's talking about Ochsner in his book, guess what? We got documents only, month ago that verify some of what Ed Haslam was positing in that book. Okay? You got to go through the document dump. I don't know if you have.
I have not really gone through it.
Okay,
no.
I'm not done with it yet. But it's a pain in the neck, okay? And it's a lot of crap, and it's a lot of annoying stuff, and especially for a guy who's got bad eyesight. Believe me, I got to go over these things many times. But some of what Haslam had to say is actually in those documents now, okay? I absolutely think Ed did a good job. I think he was misled, like many other people, into inserting her into many other things. And that's been the problem. You see, and it's not just her. I go back to the guy Gordon Arnold. If you remember the Men Who Killed Kennedy, I'm sure, because we were talking about that late 80s kind of vibe there. And
oh, I do.
Remember when the History Channel dropped that? Woo!
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I love The Men Who Killed Kennedy, and I know even it is being panned now. And there are some people out there who treat it like the Star Trek movies. I like numbers 2, 4, and 6, but I don't like numbers 1, 3, and 5. And it's like everything else, you just have to watch it and then decide after some more research and see what you can do.
But very cool looking things in 1988, 1991. Gordon Arnold. This is a guy I guarantee you'll remember because you probably watched The Men Who Killed Kennedy way too many times like me. Gordon Arnold, remember him, right?
Yes.
Okay, so he's the guy, and what was it, Gary Mack and Jack White, I think, brought him photographs with the blur, and is this you in the photograph? And he claimed to have been taking a film from the grassy knoll, right? Okay, well, here's the thing, and nobody wants to bring it up because it puts egg on a lot of people's faces. See, again, that's another thing. Over the years, I've adjusted what it is that I have thought is verifiable or good evidence over the years because new information has continued to emerge. You understand? And I've gotten access to other things. Like a lot of people go, well, there was 20 photographs in there in the plaza? You're out of your mind. You know how many there were? There were a lot of still photographs taken, a lot that the public doesn't see. They're not very flashy or pretty to show on TV, so you haven't seen them. Now, you go and you sit down with some people who have some of these collections. You can go through an array. Like, you can very easily eliminate that the character that they think is George H.W. Bush in the plaza at other angles outside of that one is clearly not George H.W. Bush. If you follow him around the plaza. And also, the Babushka lady, which one? There are at least 4. I have followed these photo arrays. Okay, wearing babushkas.
Oh, no, I've had my doubts there as well about the babushka lady, because in the photos I've seen, it definitely does not look like a 19 or 20-year-old blonde girl. That is for sure.
Oh, there's a lady there that I guarantee you has never been identified, is like minimally 65 years old. I know what you're talking about. Ethnically, if you had to guess, you might say she looks Russian. I'm just... I'm just giving you a general picture here, but definitely clearly an older woman. You can see it on her face. You can see it on her hands, actually. Her hands are clearly not the hands of a young woman. Her face is not, and she's rather thin. And, you know, anyway, back to this thing about Gordon Arnold real quick. Gordon Arnold's the blur in the Badgeman photograph, okay, and I'm not going to go into Badgeman right now because why open so many cans of worms when we still got plenty to eat? But Gordon Arnold, who claimed to have been there, who people believed for many, many years and everything else, I'm sorry to say, if you go through other photographs that should have captured him, if he had indeed been in the position that he would have been, he's not there. Now, he used to walk around in Dealey Plaza with a T-shirt on that said, "Hi, I'm Gordon Arnold." Okay, for tourists to come up and approach him and everything else. He enjoyed a bit of fame despite the fact that he looked terrified in The Men Who Killed Kennedy and all that. And some people insert themselves into these situations for that reason as well. Okay, now, I'm not judging the guy. The guy's dead and everything. I mean, you know, whatever it is, maybe he was just that lonely. Okay. But nonetheless, this has become a massive distraction because people want to know, where did his film go? Who took it from him? You know, he claimed a guy jumped over the fence, still with a gun, and took his film. So that would be evidence that somebody absconded with, a witness silenced, and that's very serious. And the more of these, you know, sort of fictitious kind of detours that we have to take in trying to examine just the crime scene itself, I mean, and that doesn't even speak to the people that have fabricated documents, the people that have claimed they found a diary, but now it's missing. I think you know who I'm referring to. The people that, you know, on and on and on and on. And I'm not saying that all of them are liars, but the people that have done this in their own minds knowing, and when it comes to somebody like Baker, I'm not even sure in her own mind she can separate it anymore. I think she generated because she's a very interesting writer of fiction. She does write fiction that she even identifies as fiction. And she has an interesting thought process with that, which you can sort of glean from that writing. If you examine it, you see, I've actually read some of her stuff that people don't want to promote. Okay, just to go through this. I don't know what her psychology is. I don't know what she believes, but she should have at some point known that at least part of what she is saying. And I'm not saying she never encountered Oswald or completely invented this out of, you know, whole cloth or anything like that. I am saying that the majority of the weight that people put on her absolute testimony and all this other stuff is overblown. And just like you said, okay, even if it was true at a certain point, I mean, now it's evolved to the point where she knows everything that went on and he's part of a hit team and all these other. Okay, but if you go back to the basic story, even the foundation of it, how important would it be to solving the crime? I don't think it would actually carry the weight it was, even if I'm very wrong. So, you know, I urge people to go look at Walt Brown's work, which is, by the way, he put out a book called Judith Very Baker in Her Own Words. And by the way, I agree with Walt about 95% of the time. And disclosure, he's a friend of mine.
And disclosure as well, I consider him a friend of mine. And again, this is a lesson about the community. I was told for years, you're not going to want to deal with Walt Brown. He's a difficult personality. And so when I finally did, Walt's been on the show, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and every time he's been so kind and so generous with his time and with the things that he says about Garrison, the magazine, and about the show. I mean, Walt has been fantastic. And again, it just shows you have to do your own work in the community, but you also have to form your own relationships in the community.
Well, you know what it is? Walt is a sweetheart. Now I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with Walt. Tell you this. Walt is a sweetheart. I've been at his house, you know, hung out, had his dog slobber all over me. Many, many times gone home with white hair all over me because his dogs are usually white, by the way. Bandit is white, the new one. Casper was white. There was another one before that. Anyway, I've known Walt for a lot of years. He is, if you do have a problem with him, he can be a little jerky with you. Okay, he can. But in general, He's one of the most intelligent and kindest guys I know. He loves animals. He's a good guy, and I actually point to him as, frankly, in my opinion, he's one of the most profoundly educated experts on the case alive. Period. But yeah, I guess if you got problems with him, he can be a little jerky. Listen, he's from Jersey. He's going to have an attitude problem.
Look, I have an ex-girlfriend who was originally from New Jersey, and let's just say that I'm not going to argue with you on
also
that.
From New Jersey. Okay.
So the Ochelli effect. How many episodes are we up to now?
Well, we passed 2,000 sometime this summer.
My gosh, between you and J.G. Michael, you guys are killing me in the number of episodes. Holy cow. But in all seriousness, I do suggest to anyone out there, if you're somebody who just goes to the gym and likes podcasts, or if you drive a lot, the Ochelli Effect archives are worth mining. They are fantastic. You will love a lot of the episodes. But I do want to ask you, 2,000 episodes down, possibly 2,000 more to go. What is it that you're still trying to do?
I have a unique perspective of the world, in my estimation, that I don't believe is represented anywhere else. So what I've done, and I really appreciate it really warms my heart. Seriously, I don't kiss up to people, by the way. And that's another thing. I'll tell you, if I think something sucks, I'm one of these guys. I have made myself a lot of unhappy friends. They send me their book, and I'm like, this is not worth my time. And they're my friend. Look, we'll send you the free documentary. We'd like you to promote it. And I'm like, this is terrible. I'm bad like that. Okay. So if I tell you something, believe me, if I'm giving you a compliment, you earned it. So deal is, it really warmed my heart for you to say that you recognize this, sort of, universe, that I've sort of created here. Because you can follow from day to day with the show, or you can take separate shows and go with them. I take that. Definitely ask me who I borrowed from. That, strangely enough, is borrowed from Howard Stern. Because the guy created a universe. He created a subculture of characters that were people from off the street that he turns into stars. He, started careers for people, brought in celebrities. Has interviewed people in an unorthodox way and has gotten them to talk about things in ways that they didn't anywhere else. So about that, it's not about the sex and the lesbians and the juvenile nonsense. But when it comes to that, I borrowed that from Howard Stern, which is you create a universe, and somebody who, here's another thing. I used to work a lot of overnights. And a lot of that was solitary work. I worked security. I worked in gas stations and stuff like this. Again, no college education. I did graduate high school, but not an impressive high school. Again, New Jersey. But back to it. I used to work a lot of nights, and I could get myself lost in again, the theater of the mind. And you have a continuous series here where I indeed cover the news, but I also sort of take a barometer of what's happening socially. Again, from my odd perspective, I certainly give you lots of literature, lots of different book authors, not just on conspiracies. Some of the more interesting authors that I've had on that have nothing to do with conspiracy. There was a guy who claimed that his new girlfriend was channeling his dead wife, and his name is Martin Sawa. That was an interesting thing where he was receiving messages from his dead wife. And I'm not saying I endorse that. It was just a very interesting story. I've had Stuttering John on my show to talk about mainly what I talked to him about as being a stutterer and what it was like to be made into a celebrity by Howard Stern, which I thought was of interest. Frankly, I found it more fascinating that he literally to this day still mentors kids with stutters and things like that. I do have an affinity for handicapped people because I am handicapped. I'm legally blind. So, people that do things despite their disabilities are interesting. I've had plenty of, the people that were involved. Sadly, a couple of them have passed away in the Flint water crisis. Injustices of any kind, whether it was the guy who was tasered while sitting in his wheelchair and dragged out of his home over a mortgage dispute, or in other cases where I've talked to, one of the guys who was beat up on the streets during the Breonna Taylor protests for no reason. They knocked him over on his moped and caved in part of his head. The guy was just a local artist who happened to be trying to bring sandwiches to some of the people that were out there protesting. Things like this I'll focus on, but I've also gone in deep on stuff like the issue of torture in the past, which, things that I find morally reprehensible, I think need to be exposed. So General Karpinski, who had her star taken away, was a guest on my show. She was in charge of the prison system in Iraq. And I'm just trying to give you a wide variety of things that I've had on. I also had Oz Fox on from Striper. I just recently retweeted like an old archive show of that because I was like, this is a pretty interesting interview where I was kind of like rock journalist for a minute. But I find him fascinating for a lot of reasons. I mean, he had an alcohol problem. He was in the, Christian rock sort of thing. And what was it like to be in the heavy metal bin at the record store when you're Mr. Christian Rocker? Found out some interesting things about him on that show, I thought, that you don't see everywhere. Isai Morales came on my show, and he said he would be there an hour. He was there for 2. And I love talking to him because he's a guy who will tell you in English and Spanish, even if you just stop him on the street, that 9/11 was an inside job. And yet he's maintained his career in Hollywood. And I think he's a great actor anyways. Starred in one of my favorite movies, Bad Boys, when I was a kid. And I just happen to be personally interested in him. And that's the thing. You might find that I'll have people on that I'm personally interested in, and you might find that I'll have people on that are relevant one way or another. Aphrodite Jones. Sometimes I have journalists on who I don't mean to put Aphrodite Jones in with other journalists, but I've had other journalists on who were covering particular events. Recently I had Addie Ads and Marlon Ettinger on to tell me what was going on in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. I also covered that for many years when people were not covering it. I covered stuff like the Bundy Ranch standoff when it was happening. I had a correspondent there. I covered the Malfour thing, as a matter of fact. Myself and my friend Daniel were waiting to go. We're live on Ground Zero with Clyde there, Ground Zero Radio, when Jason Patrick was supposed to show up and the FBI took him into custody right when he was supposed to go on air. And Clyde had to report the first time ever. One of my guests has been taken into custody by the government awaiting their interview. That was a awkward moment on 300 radio stations. And I've also interviewed, people that created media, like yourself. But I've also interviewed Clyde Lewis, and I've also interviewed John Barber. John Barber's a great one. And not only did I talk to John about the Garrison tapes, which was, my first go-to because he was one of my very first guests when I took the show live. But then I would bring him on and we'd talk about, his interactions with Red Fox. And I'd love to do a whole show with him one day if I could get him to focus on it, about being a writer for Frank Sinatra. John is one of my media heroes as well. I brought up all those radio people. Now let me tell you about John just in a minute. John has not only been an actor on everything from Sanford and Son to Breaking Bad. Okay. Guest spots here and there, but he's the guy who created Real People, which again seems like a silly, quaint little show nowadays, but honestly kind of launched the genre of let's show the nation some regular people that might be slightly extraordinary. And that's a fascinating concept in and of itself, and something that I saw as a kid. Real People was out, 1980? Something like that. So what am I, 8 years old again? Here we go. Same time period as I'm sitting in there going, how did Lee Harvey Oswald get killed when he's in the cops' custody? And, War of the Worlds. Well, John Barber came along and showed me, we can do more than just put out a scripted show and you can show real life and enlighten people one way or another. Matter of fact, one of the shows that ripped him off, funny little personal thing, one of the shows that ripped him off was called That's Incredible. So on That's Incredible one day, I saw something about, being able to assist people with bad eyesight. And wound up contacting people after that show. Something that, again, is a cast off from Barber, a rip off of Barber, goes into something, unique out there that you're not going to find on the news or whatever. I ended up being a test subject for it. Now, it failed, but I ended up being a test subject for what they call the Honeybee Lens, from that television show. Media can infiltrate, can change things, can shape your perceptions, can do a lot of stuff. And so my show altogether, going across all these things and much, much more, including Mike Swanson's on with me all the time, talking about news, sometimes stock market. I've had excellent journalists like J.P. Satilli, and others who are just reporting on specific stuff, other podcasters, etc. But either way, you end up feeling as though you're sort of in a constantly running series of This Is the World. And that is the general goal, except, you know what? I'm not going to do it in the typical fashion. It's my style. And that's all it's about. I'm not the star of the show, though. I'm just showing you different things by having a discussion. And that's the other thing. It's discussion format as opposed to interview. So it's not like question, answer. And yeah, the next 10 guys are going to ask the same questions. No, I have a conversation. Let's talk about it. Matter of fact, during the show with you, I started to realize I've got a lot more in common with you than I thought. I know you and I have some common interests, but you and I have some very interesting commonalities. I find that fascinating. It's like, okay, so these are two clearly different kinds of guys. I mean, we have different personalities, but we still have some of the same goals, some of the same ideas, some of the same things that we'd like to see corrected, some of the same things we'd like to see improved in the world. So to me, this is a constant running effort. It's always subject to revision. It's always subject to addition. And that is life. So I'm just doing that and trying to do it in a way that, isn't quite like anybody else. So.
Well, for everyone who did not hear my appearance on the Ochelli Effect, I should tell you that Chuck and I were born in the same month of the same year. So we're actually only, I think, a couple weeks apart. So we do have a sort of shared experience, though regionally he's East Coast and I'm from the Midwest. But yeah, very interesting. So for anyone out there who would love to hear your show, what are the best ways they can do that?
Well, look, if you've got a radio app and you like to listen to radio on your phone or something like that, I'm on most radio apps. First of all you got to do is, I'll get there. I'm on most radio apps. I'm in most places where podcasts are. Okay. And yeah, I'm on YouTube temporarily, I think, because they're constantly trying to knock me off of there. I am a little controversial. So understand, I'm not going to be at the top of your search list. However, if you know how to spell my name, you can find everything, including my website. And no, it's not about ego that I put my last name on everything. It's because I know nobody will steal it. There aren't too many Ochellis. So all you got to...
Well, I have you on iTunes, so I listen to you almost exclusively on iTunes. But I know there's also iHeartRadio and Spotify and all the other podcatchers.
And I've come and gone on iTunes even, where like... At one point, they disallowed me from being a podcast in the Apple world for a little bit. So I will come and go, but if you can't find me, you can look around. All you got to do is know how to spell my name, Ochelli. And if you go .com with that, you're at my website. You can get whatever it is I'm putting out, which includes, let me just get this in, which includes other people. I'm also a producer. I try and, empower others to do the same thing I'm doing. And I've been really successful with Aaron Franz, who was doing radio and podcasts before me, but now does a live show, which becomes a podcast. Actually, two of them. He does The Age of Transitions and Uncle, the podcast, or Uncle, the broadcast, which is a unique program. And, tune in and don't tune out right away. It might sound strange. But Aaron is not only an intelligent author, the author of Revolve Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood, but also a kind of a performance artist, so to speak, and shares an affinity for theater of the mind like I do. So understand that with his presentations. Anyway, I also produced the Donald Jeffries Show.
Oh, and I want to stop here and say that that the Donald Jeffries Show is great. You do a really good job with that. You know, Donald is one of my best friends in this entire field, and you know, my heart is with him right now. He's going through a very hard time, but you should definitely listen to the Donald Jeffries Show. It's very good, and I don't agree to the furthest extent of what Donald does on some things, but man, what an interesting mind, what an interesting guy, very well read, and just an overall great guy.
Well, you know, and look, I don't necessarily agree with everything Donald Jeffries does, okay, or posits necessarily, but I will tell you that I think he deserves to be heard, and he's a unique individual, and right now he's going to be on break for personal reasons, but he's an interesting author. He's definitely a good author. And again, I do not endorse all, you know, you heard me give a 95% endorsement to Walt Brown. I assure you that's very, very rare. But that's just me. I am contentious. But I've also produced in the past Pierce Redmond. I produced, you know, Dylan Wade. You know, some other people. Pierce decided he didn't want to do a live radio show. And the last one that I would say after the Donald Jeffries Show is I'm doing this thing, I'm Looking Through You with Bob Wilson, which is more entertainment oriented because that's where Bob wants to go. But I am about empowering some atypical people to get some things out there. I try to cooperate with other broadcasters and podcasters, and that's had mixed results. But you know, same time, I'm more than happy. I produce this stuff and put out my own show 5 days a week. So quite honestly, I'm working like 7 days a week on something. But I wouldn't know what to do with myself otherwise. So,
well, I suggest that everyone find those shows and really try to give them a listen, because I know Chuck associates himself with some interesting people. And again, like you said, he doesn't agree with all of them, but they do deserve to be heard. Absolutely.
All those shows come through my website. And I want to say something about you right here. You know, when I look at Garrison Magazine, I got to tell you, man, that is perfect. It's exploration. It's got the same, it's exactly the kind of thing, frankly, that I always wanted to see produced. Okay. Where again, I'm not going to agree with everything I see in there, but the exploration is the key here. And the idea that we're not just going to accept the most common explanation right away. Listen, if the simplest explanation makes sense, go for it. But if not, let's think it through. And you've even heard on my show where I'm in the middle of reading a news story that I picked to read, and I'll read occasionally from news stories, not too often, because blind guy reading live, not always. But sometimes I do it, and in the middle of reading something, I'll go, you know what, this is nonsense. I can't even finish this because this is obviously an agenda-driven piece of crap. I'm sorry I read this. And I'll discard it right in the middle of a live show because the exploration is what it's all about. And that's actually the common link between all those guys that I have. It seems to me to be the common link between everything that you have published and really, you know, again, I don't listen to a lot of other podcasters because I don't want their opinions to start influencing me. I sample things anymore. I used to be an avid listener of everybody, but I want to maintain my own opinions more, not get drilled by others. So apologies for I haven't listened to a lot of your episodes. But when it comes to what you're producing, I love it because it's like, if there was a bookshelf in, you know, I know, yeah, Grandpa, what's a bookstore? But if there was a shelf in the bookstore that was devoted to atypical exploration, alternative explanations, and history which needs to be re-examined, I feel like my show, if it was in, you know, CD form, would belong right next to Garrison Magazine on that shelf. And so extremely happy with what it is you're doing. I did not think you were going to pull it off. I saw the first.
I'll be honest, I didn't either.
Again, even though I'm getting friendly with you, I'm honest, right? I saw it. I said, there's no way this guy's going to maintain this. It's a very nice idea, but I've seen other people come out with an issue with something, and it's nice, but I know it ain't going to last. You've done this now for many, many issues, which have a lot of articles in it, and stellar job, man. I really hope that nothing gets in your way. So sorry, I wanted to take that moment to tell you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That's actually very kind. It's a labor of love, and it had to be to make it work, because it can be 5 headaches for every smile, believe me. And, sometimes, look, I don't agree with everything that's in the magazine, and I've said that multiple times, but I don't exclude someone because I don't agree with an opinion or a take that they have. I do have an exclusion policy for someone who I just think is flat out lying about their own story.
Yeah, the only line I've got, and I think that you might unconsciously have the same line, is if I feel people are really pushing something that is harmful.
Right, yes, that too. Yes.
That is actually harmful to the people consuming it. That's the only thing that I don't want to do. And I know that my judgment may be a bit askew from the average person's. There are some people, I've done things on cannabis. I interviewed Rick Simpson and other people to talk about, proper the value of that plant as opposed to it being a drug. Things like this, which is a little controversial to some people still. It doesn't necessarily mean that but I don't believe for a second cannabis is a toxin, But the thing is that when it comes to toxic ideologies, people that are really going to just rip off a whole bunch of hate speech and things like this, I'm not doing it. But other than that, and I mean hate speech. I don't mean, you've offended by using the wrong term. I'm not talking political correctness. I'm talking about people that I know are inspiring violence with this engaging in hateful rhetoric, let's call it. That kind of thing I don't do. But other than that, if you're not pushing something that I feel is directly harmful to the, in my case, the listener or the reader, then let's go. Let's take a look at it, even if I don't agree with it. Yeah. There was this guy one time, I'll just give you a quick little story about something that I cut off in the midst of realizing what it is they were doing. This guy came on and started talking about, let me see, the kinder version of the language he started to use on my show, about immigration, let's say. And it didn't go into, look, there's economic factors or this and that. It was starting to go into, racial ideology, which I think is eugenicist and negative. And I don't think that is, my own personal beliefs. I'm even willing to explore racial ideology with people, but I'm one of these people who understood very early on in my life that there's one race, right? And the thing is, he started talking about this kind of stuff where it was like, these are the people that, because of their dirty culture, basically, are contaminating the cultures of the Europeans and the Americans. And this, I put a stop to it, because that to me is hateful rhetoric that bolsters people who are, absolutely upfront, just hateful and want to do damage and, feel like, well, if I actually, harm or kill one of those people, you know what? It's not really as big a crime as if I did it to a human. The people that will actually make statements like that for real, are inspired by stuff like this. I will not support.
Right. There are obviously intelligent ways that you can talk about immigration without being a race monger.
No. Talk about the arrogance of got a pen and a phone. Talk about the fact that, by giving away the Obama phones, what you've done is created, a mechanism to track people. Talk about things like that. Talk about how Obamacare actually pandered to the insurance companies and served nobody's better. Yeah, I'll go for all of that. But you want to tell me about, well, he's not really black and this and that. you know what?
Absolutely. And I hope everyone gets out there and supports the Ochelli effect, supports the things that you do, supports the conversations that you have. I think it's important that we keep supporting this alternative media if we want it to survive. Again, think about how much you support Walmart. Think about how much you support Amazon. Support your alternative media, and I think they'll support you.
That's another thing. If I could just say that before I go, that supporting either one of us in our efforts is a very kind and critical thing to do, because some people see a nice website, they see a nice magazine, they see that, you got this or that, and they think, oh, this person's making money. No, the corporate entities that are out there doing this make money. We are not, and you got to support us directly. That's the other thing. So. Okay.
Boy, if everyone knew how much it costs me to do the magazine. Yeah.
So,
no,
it's not a money that end. And I say us because, again, I've actually felt more. I mean, I watched what you put out there, but in the interview that we did recently, where I had you on my show and we talked about the process and the mindset, I learned that you and I do have a direct sort of kinship. And again, I might not agree with everything you got to say, or you might not agree with everything I got to say. But we definitely see the value in each other's explorations. And this is what the best thing is. And I'm not the star of my show, and you're not the main writer in your magazine. So there you go.
No, I am not. And I'm definitely not the star of my show either. I always say it's all about the guests. People tune in to hear the guests. They do not tune in to hear me. Chuck Ochelli, the Ochelli effect. We'll have all of the links in the show notes. And Chuck, I want to say thank you so much for having me on your show. And thank you so much for being here on the Midnight Rider News Show tonight. It's very kind of you.
Hey, always a pleasure.
I'm St. Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show. And from the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace.